Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. On today's show, we speak with Steve Hoffman, venture investor, serial entrepreneur, and award-winning author. He is chairman and CEO of San Francisco-based startup accelerator Founders Space, which was ranked the #1 incubator for overseas startups by Forbes and Entrepreneur Magazines. We kick off the episode by asking Steve to recount what it was like launching Founders Space in China, given the fact that it was actual physical space and the hurdles and advantages he encountered. We also discuss the differences between mentoring Chinese and Western founders and how the evolving family dynamics in China with regards to their youth have influenced China's meteoric rise to become a leader in tech innovation. We also talk about what foreign founders should consider when looking to enter China, as well as what Chinese founders should consider when looking abroad. We also discuss Steve's books, diving into his most recent release, The 5 Forces That Change Everything, and end with Steve's thoughts on whether China will win the battle for AI supremacy. Enjoy.
And it's not just about your relationship to one person in China, the person you're doing business with, but it's your relationship to all the other people in that person's network. So are you connected with their family? Are you connected with their colleagues in business? Are you connected with the government that they do business with? If you have all these relationships in common, then you can usually work out anything. If you don't, if you're an isolated person, there's not much cost for them to just back out of a deal or totally change it.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Steve, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Fantastic to be here.
Awesome. As we usually do, I would love to know a little bit about you and where in the world did China come from? How did it enter your life? How did it become a part of your life? And what kind of place in your heart and in your mind and in your work does it currently occupy?
Well, I'll start with the place in my heart, mind, and work. It occupies a large place because I have spent a lot of time in China over the past 7 years. Now, how it all began was an accident. I never anticipated doing business in China. I was running Founders Space, which is a startup incubator and accelerator located in San Francisco. And we were thriving. This was over 10 years ago. And we started to get a reputation as the bridge between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world. And so we focused specifically on helping foreign entrepreneurs come into Silicon Valley and land there, connect with everybody. And our programs were different from like Y Combinator and 500 startups because a lot of the foreigners we were working with, they didn't want to spend 3 to 6 months in Silicon Valley and then have a demo day. They wanted to move much faster, primarily because they wanted to figure out if the market was a right fit for them. And they wanted to be exposed to as much as possible, as soon as possible, because a lot of times they were on a limited schedule. Their families and teams were back home. They had limited finances, all these things they needed. The accelerator accelerated. So we started cramming like 3 months worth of material into 2 to 4 week programs, really intensive programs. They ran really well. Our reputation spread. And then we started having foreign governments and foreign companies from all over the world landing at Founders Space, bringing in lots of people to figure out, see our companies, see the innovation that was happening, make all these connections. And I got an invitation, amongst other places, to go to China, to go to Beijing. So I thought, wow, I had never been to China, never studied Chinese, knew absolutely almost nothing about the country. I got invited and I said, sure, I want to go. So I went there. It was an incredible trip. They wine and dine you. and everybody's so nice. I gave a couple talks at conferences that they had set up, and then I went back and I thought that's the end of China. Well, it was a really amazing experience. But more people heard about me from that trip and just from the reputation of Founderspace. And I started to get more and more invitations. So I said, okay, I'll go back. And I went back, did it again. And I noticed this was just at the time when China was really putting their foot on the gas to pump up their whole tech industry. And the government had made an initiative to fund accelerators. It was about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. I forget. It's been a while. And they were just, everybody was all hyped up. Incubators and accelerators were beginning to really launch in China. The government was putting a lot of money behind it. All the cities were getting behind it. And everybody started to come to me because I just happened to be there and they knew of Founderspace and asked me, can you set up Founderspace in my city? Well, I was totally overwhelmed, but I said, I'll think about it. And I saw the opportunity. I said, wow, if China's a huge market, the tech industry is, big now, and it's going to get much bigger in the next, 7 years. I should invest in this. So I did. And I just kept going back to China over and over and over. And then we started launching our incubators and everything took off from there.
Speaking of those incubators, Founderspace, there's a lot that I would actually like to ask about that. I don't even know if I have enough time because I have developed a little bit of workspace for tech in China in a couple of different cities. I know that not everything is always straightforward. There is intricacies, we shall call them, in getting internet hooked up, in being able to operate and keep doors open and keep security off you. And there's just a lot of nuances that go into it. And I'm curious how close you were to it and anything that you would like to describe or tell the audience about what it's like to launch a physical space in China. And then let's talk about the space that is Founderspace there in China and how you were able to build and grow and really make Founderspace as popular as it is today.
Well, let me tell you, it's an interesting story because when I went to China, I kept going back, I kept getting invited, and all these people came up to me. And I didn't know who they were. And Chinese entrepreneurs, people want to do a deal. And if they want to do a deal with you and they think they can make some money, they want to do it tomorrow. Let's sign an agreement. Let's have an opening ceremony, a signing ceremony, blah, 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 blah. So all of them, I said no, because they all wanted to be my exclusive partner for China. And I didn't really know who they were. I didn't know if I could trust them. I didn't know the system, how anything worked. I didn't even speak Chinese. So I turned to the people I liked and I said, let's do something small together. And so this was my strategy for entering the market. It was like, let's do a small thing. Let's do an event together. Let's do a startup program where we train entrepreneurs together for 2 weeks. And then I would get to know them. And through that process, I gradually got to know different people and how the system worked and how the government worked. And after, a couple months of doing this, I decided I would partner with the government in Shanghai, Taohojing, and I don't pronounce it right, but it's a big tech park in Shanghai. I think it's the second largest, and we would open a Founderspace there. So we did that. It went really smoothly. It was great. And then after that point, everything absolutely exploded. So I was opening that up. I had written my first book, Make Elephants Fly, which is all about the process of radical innovation. And I launched it in the US with Hachette as a publisher. And I signed a deal on my own for the China market with CITIC, one of their large publishers. And the book came out. I was also doing speaking tours and my incubators were launching all simultaneously. And I happened to be invited by Tencent to give a talk in Shenzhen. And I just thought it was another talk like all the other ones I'd been giving, but they were filming it. And 2 weeks later, I'm walking down the street in Shanghai and I'm meeting different people and that I do business with. And they said, you're really famous in China. And I thought they were joking. I thought they were pulling my leg. I was like, this is a joke. But it turned out that thing was broadcast across all of China. And I don't know how many people saw it, but it was a lot, because that combined with my book, combined with the incubator opening, all these doors swung open. And then it was really fun. It was a wild ride for the next 5 years. I was spending anywhere from 30 to 50% of my time in and out of China, doing business there. We ended up opening incubators in Beijing, another one near Shenzhen, Dongguan, Nanjing, Hangzhou, Wuhan, Xi'an, different locations around China. Some of them the deals expired and we didn't renew them because the financial terms weren't what we wanted, especially the earlier ones. But we formed a lot of great relationships there, and it's been a really amazing experience.
I want to take a quick sec to talk about the book you mentioned, Make Elephants Fly. Can you give us a little insights, a little inside baseball on what you were attempting to achieve and what you were attempting to teach amongst the entertainment within about the book? And then can you maybe take those learnings and teachings and apply that to the differences between what that would look like in the US and China?
Sure. So Make Elephants Fly is all about innovation. So it's how do startups innovate, and how can these processes be applied if you're an entrepreneur? And the elephant, by the way, is your big idea. So it's your big idea. You want to get it off the ground, but making an elephant fly seems impossible. So how do you do it? What are the steps you do to get that idea off the ground? So for other entrepreneurs, they would read it. It became really popular in the startup culture in the China and other countries. And people basically took you step by step through everything you would do in the innovation process. But I also, in the book, applied how large corporations, corporate executives would use the same strategies that startups do, but in a larger organization with the challenges they have. And I will tell you, some of the concepts in that book, the book, there's a lot in there. It's packed. But the core concepts were around starting small. So a lot of people will throw a lot of money at innovation. A lot of corporations, like the CEO, will say everybody in our company is an innovator. Those all sound great, but they almost always fail. So the reason startups work so well is because by their very nature, they are limited. They are limited in size. They only have so many founders. They are limited in money. So they have to use their resources very cleverly in forcing them to innovate. And they are limited in time. So they have to iterate really, really fast. And this is something that, like, a big corporation doesn't have those limitations. So a lot of times they'll throw a ton of money, put a ton of time, put big teams on it, and it will go nowhere. Whereas a little startup with the opposite, you think it would be at a disadvantage, is actually at an advantage. And in China, a lot of people would ask me, and I got asked this question probably 1,000 times, what's the difference between Chinese entrepreneurs and how they innovate and US entrepreneurs and how they innovate? And I will tell you, it's very dangerous to generalize about anything. And first of all, a lot of people think China isn't innovative. That's simply not true. And we're seeing it now. China is extremely innovative. People innovate anywhere, but people were under this false impression because China copied a lot of ideas from the West. Well, why did they do that? Well, because copying is really smart. Like, if somebody's figured something out and you have an entirely different market you can bring it to, but you know that works in another market, why wouldn't you copy? Like, that's the best way to get going. But what people failed to realize is that they copied and then innovated. So like WeChat or QQ, they're copies of the original, chats that were out there. ICQ that was out there from Israel. They were copies, but they went way beyond the original instant messengers that they were copying. And you can see WeChat, just like, it's an amazing application, what they did and how simple they kept it for how robust it is. We use Facebook Messenger and things like that, and I still prefer WeChat. And then you look at all these, other copies like Alibaba, originally they tried to copy, all sorts of different players. One of them was eBay. But, Jack Ma was going through all these different business models until he found out what actually worked in China. And, the rest is history. So the Chinese are very innovative. But there are some differences. Now, one of the differences is that in China, it's a very communal culture. So people tend to look at the people around them for direction. In the West, we're a little, every culture is communal, but we're more individualistic. So a lot of people would say, I'm going to try this idea, even though everybody thinks it's crazy. I'm just going to do it because I'm passionate about it. And I'm going to go out there and I don't care what anybody says. I'm going to go my own way. And most of those ideas fail, but a few of them break through. And when they break through, they're huge. In China, people tend to be a little more practical. They look around them to see what's working, and then they try a variation on that's already working, because that's how the society and the culture works. China is also more hierarchical. So that in the US, a lot of people will push back. Like, in a company, they'll say, no, I don't agree with their boss. I think we should do it a different way, and blah, 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 blah. In China, it's changing, especially with the younger generation. But really, you're supposed to listen to your boss. And if your boss says something, you're supposed to do it, and you're not supposed to push back too much, or you have to be very careful how you do it. So that tends to shape how innovation happens in China. A lot of it in the US happens from the bottom up. A lot of it in China, people have to break off and then go do innovation, or it has to be a core initiative within the company. So people think different ways. Chinese are really good at executing and scaling because it's hierarchical society, and they can all and they're very work focused. As you know, Chinese work like crazy hours, 996. It's actually higher than that. It's, 9 to 9, 6 days a week. But most of the Chinese I talk to, especially in cities like Beijing, like they're working 7 days a week, and they won't get home till 10 or 11 at night. And it's just, by American standards, it's insane, but they do that. But that gives them an advantage in some ways, and it's a disadvantage in other ways. So in people will innovate and take more time for experimentation. They'll take weekends off, and some of their best ideas will come when they're like kayaking or doing something else. In China, people are just work, in an extremely competitive environment. It influences innovation, but innovation can happen in either of these. There isn't like one system that you have to have for innovation. There are many different ways you can do it. And I discuss that in the book.
I wanted to talk about what it's like to mentor Chinese entrepreneurs and then contrast and compare that with Western entrepreneurs. But I think even further is talking about what do each already bring to the table and what do they potentially need help with. And so I'd like to have a bit of a discussion, because really with the spaces and accelerators and incubators, they're really designed to try to amplify and augment and help entrepreneurs and founders and their companies be successful. What do you find is the biggest differences, the attributes, and then where they need some help between Chinese entrepreneurs and Western entrepreneurs?
Well, it's very interesting. When I go to China, and I've run many, many programs in China with Chinese entrepreneurs, training them, going over their business plans, doing demo days, pitch days, all the different things they need, personally advising their companies. And they're really receptive. Chinese entrepreneurs, they want to succeed. They are open to ideas, and they're really open because I'm a foreigner coming in. They really are open to what our perspective, like from Silicon Valley. So I'm not going to give them the same advice that a local Chinese mentor or, innovation instructor would give them. I give them advice from my culture, from my background. And then, like when we run our incubators, you were asking about this, I have foreign partners. That's how I run those incubators. So I don't have to figure out like all the logistics, everything else, like, how to pay the rent, how to pay the employees, how to keep the lights on, how to deal with security and, all these different things, how to keep the government officials happy. If I had to do that, I would fail. Like I would not have been able to run my incubators there. I have foreign partners in each city that are local to each city who have relationships with all the local mentors, all the local business people, of course, the government and everybody else. And they kind of manage that. So when I come in, it's usually part of a larger program where they are interfacing with these entrepreneurs and giving them all the local insiders. Like if the entrepreneur needs an introduction to a certain party official, or director of technology in the government, or they need to get something, the people on the ground in our incubator, my Chinese partners, tend to be very well connected, and they handle all that. So I don't do that for them. And I'll tell you, that's the biggest difference. Like in China, like if you're a startup and you don't get government support, and the government's blessing on what you're doing, it's really hard, and if you get their support, wow, the resources at your disposal, it's, it depends on your relationship at the end of the day, but there can be it can make an enormous difference in the outcome of your startup. So, especially at really at any stage in China, we can see this at any stage, having good relationships with the government is extremely important. So I know a lot of Chinese government officials, but I'm not on the ground there. Like you have to be on the ground, going out to dinner with them week in and week out and doing, all of that type of business networking to really leverage those relationships. And that's my partners. And that's what they do with our local entrepreneurs. So when they see a promising entrepreneur, boom, they're on top of it. Like they're helping that entrepreneur, making all the introductions, doing all that. And I come in as the foreigner, and my job is to give another perspective. So I talk about like how we do things in Silicon Valley, how we execute, how we scale our companies, how we evaluate business models, all these different things. And honestly, when I'm engaging with Chinese entrepreneurs, it's not that different than when I am engaging with entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who tend to be from all over the world. Like we have entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley from everywhere, China, Europe, Africa, you name it, the Middle East. I have entrepreneurs in founder space from all those countries, as well as from the US. And entrepreneurs tend to have the same fundamental questions because, at the end of the day, launching a company is providing value to the customer and figuring out, where you fit and what you can do. Where is the demand, that pent up demand for a product or service that's not being met out there that you can go in and supply. And that whole process isn't that different in different markets. The big difference in China is, how you relate to the entire system, but that's not something that that's something my local partners would navigate with the startups. But what I'm doing is more fundamental. It's like, does your business model work? Like, does this make sense? What are your, I've been with entrepreneurs and I'm like, always like, they want to know if their idea is good. And I'm saying, don't ask me. Let's go out to your customers and ask them. Like they're the ones who are going to be telling you. I could tell you my opinion, but at the end, it's just one opinion. And if I'm not your user, it's not the best opinion you're getting. So in that respect, Chinese entrepreneurs are just dealing with the same issues that U.S. entrepreneurs would deal with at a fundamental level. But then, of course, when you take your product to market, when you do marketing, when you do your launch, it's a very different ecosystem. So it's entirely different, and you have to navigate that. And honestly, the entrepreneurs in China, they know that stuff. They know how to do that. So what they're looking at when I engage them with is, what do you see in my business, and what advice can you give me that nobody else around me is giving?
So well said. So well said. That's so important. You talk about those support systems, and I want to ask you real quick about another support system, and that is maybe the surrounding support systems of the available resources of software startup programs or investors, mentors. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on the family dynamic and the supportiveness within China. Now, we know that, for a long time there was the single child policy, which meant that you kind of had a 6-to-1 dynamic. You had your two parents, and then you had each of their parents, creating kind of 6 elder statesmen of the family, all kind of focused on that one child. And if I look back circa 2010, I had to deal with that a lot. I don't think a lot of family, at least immediate families were that enthusiastic about their young people becoming entrepreneurs, nor was it easy to actually find mentors, because when you found a great startup, you kind of hid them away. Some of the top angel investors in China would say, why would I give away my expertise and my intelligence and my experience for free. And so that, and I know that has changed a lot, but I'm curious about your thoughts on what that landscape looks like today.
China is changing a lot, like you said. So the younger generation is much more westernized, especially those that are sea turtles that have gone abroad and come back. They're very westernized. The family dynamics, there's a lot of family pressure in China and a lot of family support. So families are really behind them. Like you said, or just like in America, being an entrepreneur is really hard. And parents tend to want their kids to be successful. So they try to guide them how they knew they in their generation what success was. But China, if you look at it today, parents tend to be pretty supportive of being an entrepreneur. It's a big part of the culture, right? The culture has really focused on entrepreneurship for the past decade. And even before that, the remaking of China. So so being an entrepreneur in China is pretty well accepted, except of course, if you're a parent and the kid can go work for a foreign multinational like Microsoft or a Chinese company like Huawei, those are good jobs. So there's always, and it depends on the parent and what they want, depends on the younger generation. What I see is it's what for Chinese people, when I relate to them, I really connect well with the younger generation. So super easy for me to understand where they're coming from, how they're thinking, especially ones that have lived abroad or worked in foreign multinationals. So easy to communicate. And, a lot of doing business in China is really interesting because there's a whole drinking culture and going out, to these big dinners and drinking baijiu and all this stuff. And I had to do that, especially with government officials. And that's something I'm not very good at. I'm not a big drinker. I, don't even like to drink that much. Really a challenge. But when I'm with the younger generation, like they're cool. They're like, whatever, you're going out with them. You can have coffee, you can drink, you don't have to drink. It's more westernized in that sense. So some of the biggest cultural differences I've seen with China and the US are with female entrepreneurs. So female entrepreneurs, they're still being pressured, especially by their family, to get married by 28, some 8, before they're 30, the parents and the grandparents, and they all pushing on them to get married makes it really hard for female entrepreneurs. And once they're married, the husband has expectations. It's a much more patriarchal society still. And I think it's become even more patriarchal, recently. Like there's even more pressure on women to conform, to have, focus on the family, focus on having kids. And for female entrepreneurs, I talk to a lot of them, and it's a big challenge for them, because being an entrepreneur in China is hard. Like I said, entrepreneurs work all the time. And, if they're working all the time, it's very hard to have the relationships that would lead to marriage. And it's hard to find, a partner, especially if you're a woman, to find a husband who would accept you working that hard. And then what about kids when they come into the equation? So the female entrepreneurs that succeed in China, they tend to be exceptional, but because a lot of them who could succeed just get squeezed out by all these pressures on them from society and from their family units. It's very, people in the United States and the Western world don't quite understand what it's like in China until you've been there.
Oh, 100%. You have to go there to truly understand it. I want to get to the 5 forces that change everything. One of the books you released this year. But first, before I get there, as someone who has been to China a lot and has a good understanding of what it takes to succeed there, I'm curious what you think about cross-border. So especially when it takes for startups or founders, for entrepreneurs in the West who might want to take their company into that market, or even vice versa. I'm curious on your thoughts about what it's like for Western startups entering China and some of those experiences you might have had, or helping China startups go outside of China.
So for Western companies entering China, I've had a lot of experience with this, my own company, for example, but I've helped a lot of other entrepreneurs from, Europe, South Korea, United States, Canada, all over, enter the China market. And entering the China market is tough. Like it's hard because it's an entirely different ecosystem. And then you layer on top of that, it's an entirely different culture. And it's a culture that is thousands of years old. And it's a culture built on relationships with the family, relationships with the community, relationships with authority figures and government and business. And you're coming from the outside and you're at a disadvantage in all these areas. Like you don't know anything. So really the best positioned entrepreneurs to enter China are those who have lived abroad, maybe even were raised abroad, but they're still Chinese. And so they grew up Chinese, they speak fluent Chinese, they understand China, but they also understand the West. And when they bring their companies into China, they tend to be able to navigate it pretty well. If the person doesn't have that Chinese ancestry and culture, then the bar is pretty high. And I tell them, if you're really smart, you will find someone you can really trust to partner with in launching your business in China that is Chinese, that can help you navigate this and that understands relationships, has relationships, knows how business is actually done in China. And these are so important because China, you sign a contract, but the contract is really just a starting point. It's not like the West. We think we're going to stick to the contract when we sign a contract. In China, from my experience with everybody, it's like the China kind of sets out the rules that you're beginning by, but situations change. And then the contract will, if it doesn't fit in the contract, they'll just override it. They'll change what they're doing. And for a lot of Westerners, this is really disconcerting. Whereas for Chinese, they understand it's not about what you wrote on the paper. It's about your relationship to them. And it's not just about your relationship to one person in China, the person you're doing business with, but it's your relationship to all the other people in that person's network. So are you connected with their family? Are you connected with their colleagues in business? Are you connected with the government that they do business with? If you have all these relationships in common, then you can usually work out anything. If you don't, if you're an isolated person, then there's not much cost for them to just back out of a deal or totally change it. Like that's just normal. You don't have the relationships. You're not really in their group. Even if you think you connected with them one-on-one really well, in China, that doesn't matter. It's a many to many connections that actually make the difference. So foreigners going in there, you don't do this. A big mistake they often make is they try to go too fast without getting on the right partners first, which is really, you need to take your time and be very careful and understanding the landscape well. And I went very slow for what we were doing. And I took low risk. Every time I signed a deal, I just upped the risk a tiny bit. But I had most of the risk weighted on my partner's side because I knew I didn't understand what I didn't understand. With foreign companies coming in there, I say, number one, you're going to get approached to do a joint venture from dozens of people. But joint ventures, you don't know what you're getting into. When you get a Chinese partner in a joint venture, they could be great, but they could also literally suck all the value out of what you're doing and return you with nothing but a headache because the joint venture, they may actually suck the value out of side deals they're doing with your joint venture and run up debts and things like that. I've heard these horror stories, from foreigners entering China, and then they're stuck with this joint venture, which is just a liability and hasn't produced anything and all the value that other person has taken. So this is why I generally say, get a partner you can really trust, who's bicultural, who's in there with you, your co-founder, you guys are like bonded, like you inseparable. And then you set up a wholly owned foreign company in China that you run. And out of that, you start to do deals in China. It's a better way to go. If, with intellectual property, like anywhere in the world, you have to be careful. If you have proprietary technology and stuff, you have to be careful how that's handled. And the rules are always changing. It's always in negotiation and in flux, but you should make sure you have people in China who really understand the intellectual property laws, what you can do, what you can't do, where your technology should reside, how you should license it out to people or allow people access to it in different developer groups. All these things, getting trusted people on the ground in China, lawyers, people who know the financial system, people who know the relations with the government that they can help you with. These things are essential and they take time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Let's move on to talking about, again, like I said in joke, one of the books you released this year, because you also released a book called Surviving a Startup. But the one that I do want to talk about a little bit more right now, if you don't mind, is The 5 Forces That Change Everything. I'd like to ask you to please introduce that book, tell us about the inspiration about it, tell us what it's about, and then maybe explain how China factors into that book.
Sure, I'll do that. So I'm happy to say The 5 Forces That Change Everything just launched in China, literally just launched. It's launching right now, launched a little ahead in the US. And it's getting a lot of excitement around it. This book is about how technology will transform the world and society and our lives. And right now, the 5 forces are the 5 big areas of technological change that we see happening. One is mass convergence. That's how we're all connected to each other. Like the internet is a great example. What comes after the internet? With augmented reality, metaverse, virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, how will this change our connection to each other? Next one, bioconvergence, the convergence of biology and technology, gene editing, gene therapies, biohacking, where people put chips and things in their body, all of this. Where is that going to take the world? Then there is the next one is human expansionism. And by human expansionism, I mean our push outward into space and our push inward down into the nano world of nanobots and quantum computing and all of this. And where is that leading humanity? Everything from Elon Musk going to Mars and all these space programs down to how will quantum computers fundamentally change the landscape for everything from encryption to research, advanced research and understanding the world, to new materials, to little robots, populating our bodies and actually curing cancer and things like that. After that comes the automation of the world. So a deep automation. So we are automating everything. Everything that can be automated, we are automating, literally, because we see the results. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, where we started mass production, we have been automating society. But with computers and the internet and IoT, robotics, artificial intelligence, and big data, it's taking it to a whole nother level. What does that mean? Where are we headed with our workforce? What decisions and what jobs will be taken over by AI? How will that impact our lives? How will that impact industries? And then the final one is superintelligence. That is, and this goes out into the future and basically brings everything together. As we build AI, robots, our machines that are capable of thinking at the level human beings are, where does that take us? What does it mean to have a computer that you cannot distinguish from a human being? And that's coming. It's called artificial general intelligence. It's not here yet. All we have is artificial narrow intelligence, meaning we can build self-driving cars and they can take us amazingly from point A to point B without getting in an accident, much better than a human. However, they have no concept what a city is, no concept about us as human beings, no concept, they just don't understand the world. They just do one thing extremely well. What happens when we start to have computers that are actually cognizant of the world around them and can make decisions that appear as if they are conscious? And the question is, we'll never know if they're conscious. Like, we will never know if an artificial intelligent robot is is conscious in the way we are conscious. But what I can guarantee you is at some point in time in the future, we will have a robot that will act and perform in every way like a human being, and may even look like us with facial expressions and everything else. So they're indistinguishable from a human. That will exist. And then how will that impact our lives? Will we take them on as mates, coworkers? Will they become so smart, potentially even exponentially, orders of magnitude smarter than humans? And what would that mean for us? So all those questions I pose in the book, and then I dive deep on kind of the social implications, cultural implications, what will happen, and the decisions, the fundamental decisions we need to make to actually steer on the correct path.
Amazing. And before we leave, I'm going to ask you another question to deep dive into the AI, and I have a quote that I want you to comment on. But first, the book. Where can people get the book today?
Okay, so you can get all my books at founderspace.com, and you can find me there. So just go to founderspace.com. Our incubator is there. You can submit your business plans for funding to join our accelerator. Tons of content there, videos, my podcast, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, just go to founderspace.com. All my books are there.
And what's the name of your podcast?
Oh, my podcast is Founderspace, Mentors and Masters. So it's our community of mentors and experts, and how the advice they would give to startup founders.
That quote that I was talking about relating to the conversation around AI. And I liked what you said about general intelligence versus narrow intelligence. A car can drive itself. It can probably even teach itself how to become a better driver, but it can't fry an egg. And nor would it be able to learn something without somebody teaching it first. So I really appreciate what you said there. This quote, I'm going to throw this at you. China will win the battle for AI supremacy because they have more data available at their disposal, so their machines can learn quicker and more effectively. Do you agree with that sentiment? Why or why not? Does it even matter?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting quote, probably from Li Kai-fu or somebody like that. And I would say data is really important. It is the fuel for AI. But what you have to understand is it's also the quality of the data. And different countries have different data about different things. So you could say with absolute certainty that given the number of engineers in China, given the massive amount of data they're collecting, that Chinese AI will be far superior to Western AI in China, because all the data is Chinese based. Will that data translate to our cultures, our societies, how we do things? Not all of it. And there's also lots of data that isn't just based on human interactions, because China has a big population. So that's why they're extrapolating that you get more data. But you don't get more data just from a big population. You get data from putting robots, IoT devices in the ocean, in the air, in the wilderness, up into space. There's data from all sorts of things, from transactions on different markets, like the Western stock markets and things like that. We have access to lots of data that in China they don't have. So will their AIs be superior to our AIs? Well, I would say no. They will be different, because they have different AIs and they will be put to different tasks. Now, there will be some that will compete with ours in the Western world, and we're going to see how this plays out. So nobody really knows, and nobody knows where the big breakthroughs will come through in artificial general intelligence. So right now we have machine learning and all of this, but companies like OpenAI with Microsoft backing them and lots of other companies experimenting, any of those could make a quantum breakthrough in the performance of AI and what AI can do. And it won't necessarily happen in China. Now, that said, China is a big contender. The West has to wake up, and I think they've woken up recently and understand that China is doing extremely well, has a lot of talent there, in very well-educated talent, and a lot of resources. And they are going to be producing some of the best technology in the future. But that doesn't mean it's better. It will be, I would say their technology in certain areas will be superior to ours. In other areas, we're still way ahead in certain sectors. And it's going to be a push and a pull. And what we shouldn't be thinking of is it's a winner take all world. Like where, if China is successful, the West loses, or if the West is successful, China loses. That to me is wrong-headed thought. That leads to outcomes that are antagonistic instead of us actually seeing, look, we're all on this planet together. We have to figure out how to get along. We have to figure out how to solve bigger problems that cross borders, like climate change, like hunger, things like that. We should be focusing on those and not just focusing on, competition and being adversarial. That won't get the best results in the end.
And it inspires me to ask maybe a rather open-ended question. I want to open this up to maybe your favorite piece of advice when it comes to understanding China, doing business in China, lowering your threat level when it comes to thinking about China. I'm curious, even if you wanted to go in the direction of what do you really hope from the future relationship between China and the U.S., even specifically? I just want to kind of open it up and let you just, almost as a final word, what would you like to say to our audience about China in general?
So in general, I think China is an amazing country with incredible people. I made relationships in China where I have some of my best friends now in China, and I trust them implicitly. Like I would give them access to all my bank accounts, and I know nothing would ever happen because they are just such amazing people, and we have such great relationships. Now, when it comes to the bigger picture, like economics and how we cooperate and how we work together, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on both sides. So both sides, when things change, when the balance of power shifts, which has happened, and China has grown up, it's now a big boy on the stage, and it has, economic power, military power, political power, all of these things, just like the United States does. We are the giants. And where China and the United States go, for better or worse, the world goes. So whatever our two countries decide is going to be defining the future of our planet. And if we can figure out how to get along, how to reduce friction between the countries and create an environment of trust. And I think that's one of the areas, both in business and everything else. Trust makes things happen. Trust, you have good business relationships because of trust. You end up winning because you trust your team, because you trust your partners, because you trust the system you're working in. We have to make this work on a global level for trade, for foreign relations, for commerce and economics. All these different things require a degree of trust, a degree of mutuality. So where both sides are gaining something from the relationship. If either side is trying to take it all at the expense of the other, it's not going to work. And I hope we can focus on building trust and mutually beneficial relationships as opposed to what can I get at your expense.
Thank you very much for everything you just said. I completely agree. And I think it's a very valuable sentiment. And I hope that really resonates and permeates throughout our audience. That is really a lot of the essence of what this podcast aims to do. So thank you very, very much for that. That was very eloquently put. Now, lastly, a couple of guest recommendations, if you don't mind, sir. I would like to know who you think, maybe even thinking outside of your own realm of knowledge and vertical that you're so well versed in, who are a couple of people that you can kind of think of that you think you might actually be interested to listen to on a podcast such as this?
So I'm going to make two recommendations. So one is Rebecca Fannin. If you haven't had her on, she wrote Tech Titans of China.
Yeah, we actually had her on maybe a year ago. Yeah, it's been a while. It might be worth catching up with her again.
Yeah, she's a good friend, and I meet her in the US and China, and she is fantastic. So she is one I would definitely recommend. Another is the founder of Ad China, which got acquired by Alibaba, Peter Cheng, and he is Well, he's amazing. So he did a lot of business startups in Silicon Valley, went back to China, was very successful in China with his startups. Now he runs a venture fund in China, a very different type of venture fund. Really fascinating guy. Love to connect you with him.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely take you up on that. Good reminder for anybody listening, based on Steve's recommendation as well. Rebecca Fannin, go back, find her episode. I don't have it right in front of me right now, but definitely worth a listen. She is one of the most knowledgeable people on China as well. She's also a good friend of Kai-Fu Lee, and we talk a lot about AI and stuff like that as well. So definitely good reminder there for people who want to go back and listen to that one. And we will definitely take you up on that opportunity to get introduced. I think that that sounds really interesting. You even teased us a little bit with like a very different type of fund in the way that they act. So it would be very curious for us to figure out what that is exactly. So anyway, Steve Hoffman, CEO of Founderspace and author of Make Elephants Fly, The 5 Forces That Change Everything, and Surviving a Startup, that those last two both came out this year. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。